God says in Isaiah chapter 43, verses 18 through 20, "Do not remember the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall you not know it? I will even make a road in the wilderness and bring rivers in the desert." My childhood was a metaphorical desert. Some of my earliest memories were of being at church. My mother had us there every Sunday, so I'd heard the name of Jesus many, many times in my earliest years. However, I was just a child, and the story of Jesus was just one among many that I had heard. My mother had rheumatic heart disease, and she unfortunately was diagnosed with an extremely rare liver cancer, even though she never drank, never smoked, and never had exposure to industrial pathogens. At that time, I was 8, and she was 42. So my church-going years abruptly stopped, and so did hearing about a man named Jesus. My father never went with us. He was busy fighting his own demons because he battled alcoholism. I remember that avoiding him every possible moment was one of my main objectives in the desert that was my childhood. For example, whenever I heard his truck in the driveway indicating that he was home from work, I ran to the basement to hide. So any type of nurturing or love or support from him, other than food and shelter, was pretty much non-existent. In fact, the first hug I remember him giving me, I was 11. He had come home from the hospital to tell me that Mom had died. Those were desert years. Another reason childhood was like a desert is because we had to grow up much too fast. As early as 8, I was assuming adult roles in the household, even dealing with finances. I grew up in the small town of Chase City. On any given day, you could see me walking around town doing errands at 8 years old. For example, Saturdays, I'd walk to the bank with Dad's check, deposit it, come back with $200 cash. Also Saturdays usually, but anytime. They would send me to the grocery store, which was on the adjacent block. They'd send me with a blank check and a long grocery list, and I would return with a cart full of groceries at 8 years old. Dad never spoke of Jesus, so I doubted regularly the veracity of the story that I heard as a kid. So this desert grief of my early years was just brewing, had been brewing for years, into this wilderness state of anger from all the unprocessed grief. Nothing seemed to make sense. 5 years after Mom died, I found myself a very angry teenager on June 26, 1989, the day I almost died. The completely miraculous details of this story I tell in a longer version of my Jesus story that we've already taped and that will be shown on the church Facebook page. But the short of it is that even though I always wore my seatbelt, on this particular day, I had a strong leading not to. I don't remember the accident. It was not at all our fault. I was ejected from the vehicle. I ended up with a broken back and concussion. I don't remember the accident even to this day. But this is what I do remember. I went into that day depressed and angry. But when I awoke in the hospital, I had complete peace. There was no more doubt. I knew more than anything I'd ever known in the past that God was real and that He had saved me. I don't know what happened that day, but I knew that truth when the day ended. Later, we went to the junkyard to see the car, and where I was seated, the roof was so flat. I don't believe there's any way I would have survived had I been buckled in that car. Around this time, I'd occasionally been going to church with my best friend, Christy. So I was hearing more and more about this man named Jesus, and thankfully God ordained it that I ended up going to the same university as her older sister. So I would come home on a few weekends and stay with them and go to church more and more. My first semester of college was when I really believed that I became a Christian. I was reading historical texts in my Western civilization class that were written by non-believers, but that recorded the miracles that Jesus had done. And so I realized these historical accounts had to be true. Why would non-Christians record these incidents if they didn't actually happen? It was then that I realized that Jesus wasn't just a story, but that he was the story. He made sense. And God quickly grew my faith. While I was at the university, he surrounded me with mature Christian friends who discipled me. And they took me to a solid Bible teaching church. I learned much about what being a Christian looked like on the outside, but I still did not know how, as a Christian, I could feel on the inside. I let Jesus heal me from the bondage of sin by believing and accepting his death on the cross as the only logical solution to the problem of sin and of my sin personally, but I had not let him heal me yet from the bondage of myself, from the chains of the emotional wilderness that were shackling me through the grief and the anger. This is about my third year of college. God had used one of my best friends who frankly just knew about my anger problems. And she told me, she said, "Carole, you can't keep living like this. You have to give this to God." And she was right. And I finally got sick enough of it one night to get down on my knees and I begged God to help me overcome my emotional past. And the short of this story is that he did. More and more I became grateful in my soul. I noticed more and more that the things that used to trigger my anger had little to zero effect on me. God does make a road in the wilderness. In those college years, I progressed. God grew me from churchgoer to Sunday school teacher to even a youth group leader at another church. I went on several mission trips, teaching about the healing that I found in Jesus. I even lived one summer at a shelter for homeless families where I was able to help a lot of angry people make sense of the deserts and wildernesses that they were wandering in. And in the many years since, whenever I notice anger or grief trying to creep in, all I have to do is recall a favorite Bible verse, such as Zephaniah 3:17. "The Lord your God, in your midst, the mighty one will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He'll quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing." That's good stuff. My friends, the negative thoughts have nowhere to reside when we're filling our minds with the Word instead of with the distractions of the world that we tend to fall prey to. The happiest Christians I've ever met were also the poorest Christians I've ever met. God taught through me people in third world countries such as China and India and Haiti, and I was just astounded at the richness of faith that our lives can have when we surrender to Christ. So in spite of the desert, in spite of the wilderness, God did many new things in me. And the wilderness from my early broken family beginnings definitely ended when he led me to my marriage to Coy, and I gained new parents and eventually had two lovely, darling, precious daughters. Most people aren't so likely to almost die in a car accident, so please listen. Believing that God exists isn't enough. The book of James says that even the demons believe, but we know their eternal destination. Jesus is the difference. All world religions can't be right. He is the story. He's the only God, the only way and the truth and the life, and no man gets to the Father of heaven except through him. Please seek. You'll find. Jesus makes sense. This is just a small part of my Jesus story. There was a day I almost died, but I didn't. And there were days that were filled with grief and anger and sadness, but those are gone. Jesus can take each seemingly impossible desert, each seemingly endless wilderness, and cultivate them for kingdom growth. We can have victory over any part of our past that may be binding us. Today, I live peacefully in the knowledge that God uses the broken, he uses the angry, he uses the confused and the lost, and he even delights in us, the psalmist says. He quiets us with his love. I love that line. He even sings over us. He breaks down the walls that we've built and the walls that we've let others build for us. There's freedom in the cross. There's victory when we know and love Jesus, the only Son of God. Let him do a new thing in you too. It shall spring forth. He makes rivers in the desert and roads in the wilderness. Shall you not know it?